This is Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app. Now, live from the Matt Blatt Kia Studios.
What a move!
Here's Josh Hennig.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, live in the Matt Blatt Kia Studios. Of course, 97.3 ESPN, the app, brought to you by First Bank of Seattle City. And we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can watch the show live here at 97.3 ESPN on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Glad to be with all of you today on the show. We got a lot to get to in just a little bit amount of time to get to it, of course. We got to talk about the Eagles. We got to talk about the Sixers. We got Bryan Toporek from the NBA podcast, also Forbes NBA writer, joining us coming up in about less than 20 minutes from now to get more into the Sixers and the NBA. Also, your thoughts and comments, 609-403-0973 is the text board. And you can comment while watching the stream live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. So for those who have not seen it or may have heard bits and pieces about it, listening throughout the day today, up on the website, 973ESPN.com, we have the details, the latest news out there about the situation, what happened with the Eagles, how the divorce went down. We also got a poll question over at 973ESPN asking you who the Eagles should draft. So we got a lot of different things to get to in just a little bit amount of time here. You still have just a little bit of time to vote on this at 973ESPN. At the Wentz trade is in the books. We'll start looking at the free agency and the draft. If there's a specific player, leave the player in the comment section. But they want to know, Mike and Bros asked you, who should be drafted? And right now, overwhelmingly, 57% say wide receiver, 15% say quarterback, 13% say offensive line, 14% say linebacker and cornerback. But I want to start with this story about the Eagles and Carson Wentz. We've been discussing here on 97.3 ESPN, myself, Mike Gill, and others, for weeks. A lot of different details, a lot of different layers, a lot of different things that go along with this deal and why it happened and how we got to this point. And up until now, there was a lot of conjecture. There was a lot of anonymous sources. There was a lot of informed speculation. I say until now. The details are over at 97.3 ESPN.com, but Sports Illustrated NFL insider Albert Breer, who writes the weekly MMQB articles, covered the NFL for over a decade now, is as plugged in as anybody. He explains, as you can read the full story at 97.3 ESPN.com, that Carson Wentz's agent, Ryan Tollner, called Howie Roseman. And after he spoke to Wentz, Tollner passed along Wentz's feelings to Roseman, letting him know that Wentz felt it was best to get a fresh start elsewhere. And then Roseman gave Tollner, Wentz's agent, the authority to go out and see about potential suitors, one of them being the Colts because of his relationship with Frank Reich. Also reported in this same report, again, all the details are 97.3 ESPN.com and the 97.3 app, 97.3 ESPN mobile app, that Wentz clashed with Groh, that there was a perception in the building that the Eagles were coddling Wentz. Wentz struggled to connect with teammates, that he couldn't relate to every corner of the locker room like Nick Foles could. Furthermore, in the story, it details that Chris Ballard and Roseman got to a stalemate. And that at one point, Ballard turned to the Eagles and said he wasn't willing to wait forever, and that his offer had an expiration date. And that's when the deal got done. And that the Colts, the reason why they traded what they traded for Wentz was because Chris Ballard worked for the Chiefs in 2013 when Alex Smith was traded from San Francisco to the Chiefs. So they were using that template for this deal. Of course, the article goes on to talk about what the Eagles' plans are for the future at quarterback, but that's topic for another story. This is where I want to point everybody to. This situation was untenable. This situation got to this point because of everyone involved. All right? Everyone involved got this to this point. We should not be surprised that this happened. It's been speculated and conjectured and everything till we're all blue in the face. And everything that we thought has come to be. Everything we thought is true. So now what do? Well, now you got to move on. And part of moving on is Jalen Hurts. Now, the report goes on to say that the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be grinding hard on every option, that's the quote from Albert Breer, with the 6th pick, quarterbacks included, that the Eagles could build around Jalen Hurts or a new rookie quarterback, and if that worked out, start the clock over of having a quarterback on a rookie contract, which will help get Philly through its cap issues. So Breer is inferring that the Eagles should maybe consider or maybe will consider the quarterback position. Now, a lot of this depends on what your perception is of the Hurts pick. But for those of you who voted on this poll that Mike Gill and Hunter Brody put up at 973 ESPN, 15% of you, which is the second highest percentage, are going quarterback. So this has maybe a little bit more legs than we originally thought. This idea that the Eagles could draft a quarterback. I, for one, am completely against it. All right? I have no interest in drafting a quarterback at this time. And it's not because I dislike the quarterbacks in this draft. Let me lay out for you who the quarterbacks are in this draft. We know Trevor Lawrence is going number 1 overall. All right? We know that Justin Fields and Zach Wilson are not getting out of the top 8. We know that North Dakota State's Trey Lance is the apple of some team's eye because of his potential, not because of what he can do immediately, but because of his ceiling. And then Alabama's Mac Jones was a Heisman Trophy candidate. He's been rising up draft boards. He impressed a lot of people at Senior Bowl week. So the idea is that you're going to have 5 quarterbacks taken in the first round this year. Lawrence, Fields, Wilson, Lance, Jones. Those are your 5. The reason why I don't have an interest in the Eagles taking any of those guys is because you didn't draft Jalen Hurts to just now all of a sudden bench him. You don't just draft him another quarterback. I'm completely out on that concept. If I'm to believe what the Eagles think, that they believe that Jalen Hurts was worth a 2nd-round pick, that they were willing to invest what they did into him, you got to give the guy a fighting chance. You don't bring in another rookie quarterback to stir the pot. You don't need more drama in Philadelphia. You just told the drama to leave. You told the guy who couldn't get along with the locker room. You told the guy who was viewed as coddled. You told the guy whose agent negotiated on his behalf to get out of town, Carson Wentz. You already sent him packing. You told the drama to leave. You don't bring more drama in here. You need to give Jalen Hurts a respectable opportunity to be successful. I've said this once, I've said this twice, and I will keep on saying this. You gave Carson Wentz all these opportunities to be successful. You gave other quarterbacks in this franchise's history multiple opportunities to be successful. Nick Foles, Michael Vick, Donovan McNabb, Kevin Kolb. You gave these quarterbacks opportunities to be successful. You at least have to give Jalen Hurts the same fair shot. If you don't, that's a bad on you. That's a negative against the organization. That, to me, says that you don't have faith in him. And if you don't have faith in the guy that the rest of the locker room has faith in, because the rest of the locker room likes Hurts, they believe in him, they call him a leader, that's what Jalen Mills says, you got to at least follow through. So I'm much more understanding that 57.8% of the people who voted in this poll are going wide receiver. Now, you know me. I say go defense. Get a superstar level defensive player. You can find wide receivers in the second and third rounds. T. Higgins and Michael Pittman are two of the three best wide receivers from this quarterback class long term. Yes, guys like Jefferson and CeeDee Lamb had big moments early in their rookie seasons. So did Jerry Jeudy. And Ruggs showed splashes as well. But Pittman and Higgins are volume target guys like Jefferson. And you could argue that those three are potentially going to have the best careers of anybody in this draft, of that draft last year. Well, Higgins and Pittman were in the second round. But I understand the people who say go wide receiver. I'm not against it. But do not sell your soul for another quarterback. It's not that I don't think that Justin Fields or Trevor Lawrence or any of those guys can't play in the NFL. Trevor Lawrence is a once-in-a-generation quarterback. I get that. Justin Fields is probably going to be at least a Pro Bowler, if not a superstar in the NFL. You look at the tools that Zach Wilson brings to the table. I have my own personal concerns about him, but I understand the NFL loves his tools. They love what he brings to the table. So to me, I'm just not going that direction because none of those quarterbacks is going to fix the Eagles' problems at all. 609-403-0973 is the text board. Texter chimes in and says, no QB. I'm with you, Josh. Take Devonta Smith or Jamar Chase. Get a wide receiver to develop with Jalen Hurts. None of those QBs outside of Trevor Lawrence is a better option than Jalen. And listen, I agree with you. Listen, Jalen Hurts has the it factor. He's not some pushover. Okay? This kid has serious talent, does Jalen Hurts. He's built like a brick house. He's durable. He has leadership qualities. Let him have a chance. Listen, Texter, if your philosophy is get a wide receiver to help Hurts, I'm fine with that. If your theory is you got a young quarterback coming in here and he needs time to develop, I'm good with that, Texter. Listen, you want to get Chase? I'm cool with it. People know that I got my reservations about Devonta Smith. I do. It's just who I am. It's a personal bias I have. Maybe it's because of all the injuries I've seen players sustain over the years. But to me, when I look at Devonta Smith, I see a tiny human being. And I'm a little worried about his durability in the NFL. I'm a little worried about his ability to hold up to the hits. You're that thin. You're that lean. Come on, man. You got to do a few more squats. You got to put a little bit more mass on. That's just my opinion. But I'd much rather you go wide receiver than quarterback at 6 overall. Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, text board is open at 609-403-0973. Also, shout out to everybody watching on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter. Jeff Bone and Pookie watching on the YouTube. What's up, Josh? What is up, Jeff? Watching on the Facebook channel at 97.3 ESPN. Game Night here on 97.3 ESPN being brought to you by Copiers Plus, providing quality products and services to South Jersey businesses since 1986. Service is their specialty. Visit them online at copiersplus.com. We'll continue the Eagles talk a little bit later in the hour at 609-403-0973 to get on the conversation here on 97.3 ESPN. But next, we will get into the 76ers as they are splitting their two-game set down there in Tampa against the Raptors, because that's not confusing. The Toronto Raptors playing in Tampa. Welcome to 2021 and this pandemic world. So we'll get into the Sixers and more coming up with Bryan Toporek from the NBA podcast right here on GameNight on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app powered by First Bank of Seattle City. And we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Just follow 97.3 ESPN.
You're listening to Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, hanging out with you this hour. Don't forget my Fanduel Sportsbook pick of the night. Just about 25 minutes from now. We'll get to that here on 97.3 ESPN. But join me right now, live on the stream, right here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline. He is a friend of the show, Bryan Toporek, the NBA podcast. He joins us, of course, here on 97.3 ESPN to get more into the situation with the Sixers, with the NBA, and more in the NBA podcast. Bryan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you, Josh?
Doing pretty good. So before we get to the Sixers specifically, I got to touch on with you. So I'm listening to your guys' podcast last night, the NBA podcast. You guys talking about the NBA reserves. And you guys didn't get as too deep into this aspect of as much. But I wanted to ask you here, how much do you think that Doc Rivers being the coach for the All-Star game is going to impact who those reserves are? Because to me, I noticed that Doc has really been advocating for Tobias a lot. So I got to think that, maybe Doc is sitting there saying, if I got to go to bat for anybody, maybe it's not as much Ben, maybe it's Tobias.
Yeah. Well, I mean, based on his comments the other night, Doc doesn't even want to go to the All-Star game.
That's
he was
true.
saying he'd rather be golfing. But, it's all 30 coaches choose the reserves, not just Doc. So I'm sure Doc does want all three. He said as much the other night. But I don't know if he's calling up coaches in his free time trying to lobby to get Tobias and Ben on the team. I think he's just saying, I think this was pregame yesterday where he's saying, team record should factor into it. The Sixers right now are the number one seed. So, he was saying other guys are putting up bigger numbers, but they're not necessarily contributing to winning basketball. Whereas Ben and Tobias, they might not have the numbers of a Trae Young or a Zach LaVine, but the fact they're on the number one team in the East right now should be considered when you're choosing reserves.
Do you think that Tobias Harris has earned his slot for the All-Star game this year? Because I personally do.
So I wrote about this at Forbes the other day. I think Tobias has had an All-Star caliber season, but I think there are a lot of guys in the East that have. And I think it's just going to be a numbers game in terms of, do the other coaches value team success? Do they say, all right, the Sixers right now going into Tuesday when we're going to announce these reserves, they're going to be the number one seed. So they by default need to have two players on the team, in which case I think it's going to be tough to choose between Ben and Tobias. Tobias has been more consistent all season. Ben has really come on offensively in the last couple weeks, but defensively, he's been a monster all year as well. So, I think you can realistically make the case for probably 16 or 17 guys at least in the East. The thing that might work in Tobias's favor, and I kind of covered this, is that I don't know that all 12 players who will be selected will end up playing, Joel Embiid included. I mean, he's had this back injury off and on for the past couple weeks. A few weeks ago, he was asked about this, and he was kind of just saying, I'll see how I feel in early March when we get to that point. So it wouldn't totally shock me if a guy like Embiid or a guy like Kevin Durant, who's been in and out of the lineup all year, if they, just say, hey, I'm not 100% healthy, I don't want to play in this meaningless exhibition, and that will open up an alternate spot for one of these guys who might get left out tomorrow night.
That's an interesting aspect you brought up. Let's hit on that a little bit more. How many of these guys do you think are going to use the injury exception, for lack of a better term, as a way to not play in this game? Because we know some of them, they have no interest in going anyway. Some of them have no interest in going to Atlanta and showing up, while other guys are like, oh, yeah, I'll go. I don't care. So, how many of those bigger names that the NBA is banking on being there might just decide, street clothes is good for me.
Yeah, well, I mean, in the West, Anthony Davis, it sounds like, is definitely going to be out. In the East, I think Embiid and Durant are probably the two biggest names and biggest risks in terms of sitting out. Jimmy Butler, I guess, he's gotten his win back since he came back from COVID. Same with Jason Tatum. So I wouldn't blame them for wanting out. I don't think Jimmy's going to make it because he's missed so much time. I think Tatum will make it, and I think he will play. So I think AD, Embiid, Durant are the big three that you have to watch in terms of guys who will probably be selected for the All-Star game, but then might not actually play.
Bryan Toporek joining us here on the Boardwalk Kind of Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. Don't forget the NBA podcast. You can get on Spotify, Google Play, Apple Podcasts. Follow Bryan on Twitter at @BToporek for all of your NBA coverage. Let's zero back in on the Sixers then and wait for the All-Star game. Obviously, a lot of people, it seems like there's two camps right now. There's a camp of Sixer fans who say, we're number one in the East, Doc Rivers is the man. And there's another contingent that say, who cares if you're number one in the East, because we've seen fill in the blank team, the Bucks, the Hawks, whoever, be number one in the East for it doesn't matter. Where do you fall among those camps?
Could I say somewhere in the middle? Is that
sure? Make your own camp. Stand your ground, Bryan. Come on.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the Sixers are the best team in the East as currently constructed. I think the Brooklyn Nets, despite their defensive concerns, once we get to the playoffs, I think they're the biggest threat to represent the East in the finals. I think the Sixers are on the next tier of teams. I think it's probably them and the Bucks who have the best chance of beating the Nets. I think the Sixers, if they went into the playoffs without making any major changes, the two big concerns with them, really, it's been the lack of a stretch big coming off the bench and then the lack of another ball handler coming off the bench. Really, just the bench in general the last few weeks has been a disaster. We saw it more when Shake Milton missed a couple games where they just, every time the starters went out, they couldn't create any offense for themselves. Now, Doc and Morey have both said, look, in the playoffs, we're going to shorten our rotation. So the issues that you guys are correctly identifying right now might not be issues in the playoffs. That said, I just don't know. They still have so many guys who are great one or the other, like Dwight Howard, great in terms of rebounding, doesn't provide much offense. Matisse Thybulle, incredible defensively, but, has scored 2 points or fewer in more games than he hasn't at this point. Shake Milton, very good offensively, should be more of a scorer than a point guard. Also, his shooting has dropped off significantly from last year. So I think they do need to make some moves if they really want to be a legit threat to the Nets in the next few weeks. But I think they should feel good about where they are, especially considering what happened last year. They came in as one of the finals favorites and then fell to 6th in the East. This year, they kind of got overlooked in the conversation coming into the season. And now we're rapidly approaching the All-Star break to the number one seed. That should not go unnoticed.
Now, you mentioned the bench. That's become the hottest debated thing here because we saw the report about Kyle Lowry earlier today. We know that George Hill's name's been thrown out there. Wright from the Pistons. DeLon Wright. That's his first name. I forgot his first name for a minute. Bad job by me. DeLon Wright for the Pistons. His name's been thrown out there. There's a lot of guys. PJ Tucker's another name. Who are some of the guys that you think make the most sense? Because while Kyle Lowry sounds like a great guy to bring in here, I was running the numbers earlier today. I think the only way this is going to work is if you get a third team involved to make Kyle Lowry. I mean, $30.5 million is nothing to sneeze at for a cap hit.
Yeah, that's the problem with Lowry. I'm sure the Sixers would be interested in him in particular, and if they can make the numbers work, that's great. But yeah, it's going to take Danny Green plus Mike Scott plus Vincent Poirier and Terrence Ferguson, and at that point, you're just sending out so many players. The Raptors don't have enough roster spots, so yeah, you probably do need to get a third team involved there. I think you named a lot of the trade targets that have come up frequently among Sixers fans: George Hill, DeLon Wright, PJ Tucker, Bielitsa from the Kings. Multiple reports have suggested the Sixers are interested in him. JJ Redick came up earlier, I think last month at this point. He's gotten back to what he usually does. He started the season just ice cold from the field. since he came back from those DNPs, he's much better in terms of shooting. I think he's shooting over 50% from three again. He'd be lower on my list. I think really, the ball handler type, like a George Hill, like a Delon Wright, would be high. I haven't seen Rudy Gay's name thrown out at all. And it might just be like the Spurs aren't planning to sell and they're just going to let all these expiring contracts expire and see what happens. But he is on an expiring deal. And I think he could really fill a nice role coming off the bench for this team as well. So again, I'm not reporting this at all. This is just in terms of who I think they could actually use, the type of skill set. He'd be a guy that I would be trying to go after as well.
When you think about, because you mentioned Rudy Gay, we're talking about a lot of expiring contracts. I feel like that's going to be the trade market this year, right? Like, I feel like because of where the league is and the flux from the bubble to this weird, wacky season that's had COVID and weather postponements, for goodness sake. I mean, I never thought that a winter storm in Texas would be causing NBA games, but welcome to 2021. I feel like that for everything I'm seeing, Bryan, that those expiring contracts are going to be the greatest commodity for the trade deadline.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be a weird trade deadline too, because this is the first time we've ever had this play-in tournament that we knew about. I mean, they instituted last year in the bubble, but we have 10 teams now in each conference that are going to end the season and not be eliminated from the playoffs right away. So, those teams in the 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 mix may all say, hey, we don't want to be sellers. We want to at least have a shot to make it to the playoffs, which is going to limit the number of teams that are sellers, the teams that are just so clearly out of the running, the Detroit Pistons and the Minnesota Timberwolves of the world that are just going to be, by March 25th, mathematically just too far gone, which, yeah, I mean, that's going to limit the number of teams that are selling players, and that's going to drive up the price on all of those guys. I think the Thunder are interesting because they've been more competitive than you might have expected, considering how much talent they've lost over the past 2 years. But they still, I think, are correctly saying, our future is built around guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Lou Dort, Darius Baisley, some of our young guys. We have George Hill, Trevor Ariza, Al Horford, who are all on the wrong side of 30. We're going to be willing to move on from these guys if we can get anything for them. It's just, the George Hill, I think, would be the interesting one because he's not an expiring deal. So, for the Sixers, I think they might be reluctant to give up a prospect like Tyrese Maxey for a guy who could leave in a couple months. And I think that's a reasonable concern. I don't think they should give up Tyrese Maxey for George Hill, but the fact he has another year on his deal, I would be willing to up the ante a little bit more, knowing, okay, we've got this guy for, the rest of this season and next year if we want. Only a small portion of the contract is guaranteed, but if he plays well, we can have that backup point guard spot resolved for next season already.
Bryan Toporek joining us here on GameNight on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, you can follow him on Twitter at @BToporek on Twitter. Of course, the NBA podcast he is the co-host of, him and Morton Jensen. Great content. Want to check that out. Again, it's the NBA podcast. Speaking of the NBA, Bryan, before I let you go, I got to know what you think of this Minnesota firing Ryan Saunders and in 24 hours hiring Chris Finch. I'm sorry, but this just screams something wacky here because, listen, I'm not trying to judge Rosas. I understand him and Finch have a background, but in a world where we're supposed to be giving everyone equal access to jobs, this feels very, very slippery to me.
Yeah, I don't know enough about what the process looked like when they decided to move on from Saunders, when they identified Finch as their next guy. I know Damian Lillard in particular has been pretty upset that David Vanterpool, who was an assistant coach for them, didn't get the opportunity. I think I was seeing quotes from Rosas today, so I'm guessing he's giving a presser either right now or a little bit earlier, where he was saying basically they didn't think they had performed well enough on either side of the ball where if they promoted one of these assistant coaches, it would actually bring the change that they think they need. They needed some sort of an outside presence to bring that type of a change. But yeah, if I'm David Vanterpool, I can't imagine I've had happy 24 hours, thinking about my long-term future with the Minnesota Timberwolves organization. So yeah, I agree. It's, it might be the right hire. Like I have no knowledge as to whether Chris Finch is going to be a good or bad coach, but I think the process that led to his hiring could have been handled better.
Yeah, I got to think the NBA's got to look into this, right? I mean, in the NFL, they have the Rooney Rule. It's been very heavily talked about this offseason with NFL head coaching hires. The NBA is supposed to be the league that's progressive. They're supposed to be the league that doesn't make these stupid mistakes. And, okay, you have Rosas. I understand that he has a previous relationship with Finch, but it just feels like, man, somebody messed up somewhere here. And I saw the one quote from Rosas. He said that we had a limited window. We had to jump on the opportunity. And I'm like, limited window for what? You're the only team with a head coach opening.
Right. Not to mention, I mean, they could have reached this decision in the offseason, and then when they had a 9-month offseason, when they shut down in March, didn't come back till December, you had a lot of time to evaluate whether Saunders was the right coach for the future, whether you wanted to bring in a new voice, who that person would be. To make this halfway through the season when your star player has missed so many games because of injuries and COVID, it feels like when Sacramento did this, I forget, I think it was Dave Yeager, if I remember correctly, where they started off really well and then Boogie got hurt and then they fired Yeager and just turned into an absolute mess for the rest of the year.
He's Bryan Toporek. The NBA podcast is the podcast you need to get a hold of for all your NBA coverage. Follow Bryan on Twitter at @BToporek. Check out all of his work as well over at Forbes Sports. As all guests, he appeared here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Bryan, appreciate you jumping on. Good to see you in the virtual flesh.
Yes, good to see you too, and look forward to battling in some fantasy basketball.
Yeah, I don't think I'm facing you this week. I think I'm facing somebody else this week. So
yeah, no, I half of my team is hurt. I'm just hoping to coast until the playoffs, and then maybe I'll be able to field a healthy roster at that point.
Well, we're fortunate that we have a good league manager who actually gave us 2 IR slots instead of some leagues that apparently I'm reading online that have no IR slots. So appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I have 7 guys eligible for that right now, so I didn't give enough in retrospect.
Well, I only have 3, so I'm not totally dead in the water. So, Bryan, appreciate you jumping on, man. Take care.
For sure. You too, Josh.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Of course, we are live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can watch the show here on 97.3 ESPN. We'll get back to your text messages and Facebook and Twitter messages. YouTube as well, 609-403-0973 is the text board. The jump on the show as well through the text board, listening on the radio here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN FM and the 97.3 ESPN mobile app, powered by First Bank of Seattle City.
Now, more Game Night with Josh Hennig on 97.3 ESPN and the free mobile app.
Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN, live on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. You can watch the show live in the Matt Black Kia Studios on 97.3 ESPN. Tonight on 97.3 ESPN, we have a college basketball doubleheader starting with Duke and Syracuse at 7, followed by Texas Tech. And I just drew a blank on the other team. I will get that information for you in just a moment here on 97.3 ESPN. FanDuel Sportsbook Pick of the Night is coming up in just a bit. Stay tuned for that. We'll also get your thoughts and comments at 609-403-0973. And all of you watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Texas Tech versus Oklahoma State is the second game on our college basketball doubleheader tonight on 97.3 ESPN. Don't forget my friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook. That's right. One of the things I love about betting on basketball with FanDuel Sportsbook is I'm always finding new player props or game props that I like, and you can combine those props with other bets for the same game to score an even bigger payout. Yes, it's called a same game parlay. You can only find it on FanDuel Sportsbook. With the same game parlay, you can combine player point totals, game over-unders, first half point spreads, and more. Right now, new and existing users, I should say, can get up to $25 back every day if your parlay falls one leg short with the same game parlay insurance. That's right. every day. Just another reason why betting with FanDuel Sportsbook is the way you need to go. So download the FanDuel Sportsbook app now and try same-game parlays. Use my promo code Hennig when you sign up with promo code Hennig. FanDuel Sportsbook, sportsbook.fanduel.com, or the FanDuel Sportsbook app. Must be 21 or to play. Must be present in NJ or PA. Full terms and conditions at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Again, I got my eye on a couple games tonight. By the way, I hope you guys took my picks from Saturday because, man, Derek Lewis knocked out Curtis Blades. You know, I was feeling a little tentative before I gave that pick, but I said, you know what? My mind's in the right place. I'm going to make this pick. I picked the Heat to cover the 3.5. They won the game. It was a good weekend. I hope a lot of you got in on those picks as well. We had a losing day before that. We had a winning day on Saturday. So, hey, listen, we're all here trying to do the best we can, right? So we'll get you my FanDuel Sportsbook in just a bit. But I got your messages to get to at 609-403-0973. And all of you watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. I want to first get to Facebook first because Al chimed in with a very important question a little bit earlier. I was talking about Devonta Smith. Al Fisher chimes in on Facebook watching on 973 ESPN and says, Josh, Devonta Smith NFL comparison is Marvin Harrison. He wasn't a big receiver, and I think he turned out pretty well. Well, there's a huge difference between Marvin Harrison and Devonta Smith, and that is this. Devonta Smith would not weigh in at senior week. He is listed as between 160 and 170 pounds, depending on what website you look at. Marvin Harrison came out of college weighing in over 180 pounds. He was much closer to 200 before his career was done. And Marvin Harrison had strong legs. You go back and watch him leap. He was a leaper. He was a jumper. One of the things that made Marvin Harrison very underrated, he attacked the ball at the highest point. Devonta Smith is a little bit different to me. Devonta Smith is not that explosive jumper, that explosive go get the ball. He is a guy who runs excellent routes. He is a guy who has incredible sense of the football game, knowing when to do certain things. I understand that people are pointing at Harrison because of the size similarities, but there's almost a 20-pound difference between the two. And for football, 20 pounds can mean a lot. And when your legs are as small as Devonta Smith's are, it's not a good sign to me. If I had to compare Devonta Smith to anyone, I mean, maybe Marvin Harrison makes sense. I don't think it's a bad comp, but, man, I wish Devonta Smith had those extra 20 pounds that Marvin Harrison did. I feel a little bit better about that. But maybe he puts that on between now and the start of the NFL season. Listen, I've seen guys put on a lot of muscle in a short amount of time without any steroids, without any PEDs at all. You know, you just change your diet up a little bit here or there. You maybe do a couple exercises you've never done before and do them consistently for about 4 or 5 months. And you train like an animal. You come out looking pretty good. I've seen guys do it before in all sports. So, but I appreciate Al Fisher chiming in on Facebook. Let's jump over to the text board real quick, 609-403-0973. John D. chimes in on the text board and says, if I'm the Eagles, I go offensive line. They really only have 2 worth anything, Kelsey and Johnson. And who knows how much longer Kelsey plays. That's John D. on the text board. So a couple things there. Number one, I think you're forgetting about Brandon Brooks coming back from the injury. If he still can play at a high level, you got to put him back in there. That guy's a Pro Bowl level right guard. And also, I liked what I saw from Mailata this year. I liked the fact that Mailata was aggressive. He was a very, very good offensive lineman. I was very impressed with him this year. I like Mailata for this team. So maybe the only guy I'm really not sold on is Sayamalu. So I think you got to go 3, John D. I think you got to say Kelsey Johnson and either Brooks or Mailata, depending on how you feel about Brooks' injury. If you think Brooks' injury, he can come back from like he has other injuries, then I think you just move forward and say, you know what, that's the guy. But if you got a problem with Brooks' injury, you got to admit Maya Elias showed you something this year. Now, it's ironic that John D sent that message in on the text board at 609-403-0973 because Robert chimed in on YouTube with a similar question himself. Robert Herbert on YouTube says, do you think Kelsey will retire? Now, that's a whole nother conversation. See, the Kelsey thing, he's one of the best centers in the league. But he's been doing this on again, off again dance. And whether he's going to stay, whether he's going to go, what's going on with him. I don't know, man. Kelsey's a very interesting conversation to me. I don't think Kelsey gets enough credit for how good he is. But, man, you look at what he brings to the table and the fact that he's considered retiring before, you really do have to wonder where his mind is at, what the state of his game is. Because for as talented as he is, as incredible as he is, you have to wonder how much longer he's going to do it. And if he retires, that offensive line goes from a strength to a weakness. Josh Hennig here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Let's get another text in here at 609-403-0973. Of course, all of you watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter, you can comment as well. Dan from EHC says, the problem with not picking a guy like Zach Wilson is he could be the one. If you look at Super Bowl champions, it's almost always a top 5 quarterback. How can we really know what Hurts is? Eagles probably already know. So a couple things there, John. Number one, just because a guy can be a great quarterback doesn't mean you have to draft him. Doesn't mean that your situation is right for him. There's quarterbacks who succeeded one place but didn't succeed somewhere else. There's a long history of these guys who, whether it's Jim Plunkett, whether it's Kurt Warner, whether it's Matt Hasselbeck, they have to go to another team to have the success they're going to have. Carson Palmer's great with the Bengals, horrible with the Raiders, really good with the Cardinals. It's one of those deals where I'm not going to always sit here and say just because a guy could be a great player doesn't mean I have to draft him. Now, you talk about almost always a top 5 quarterback win Super Bowl. You can't win a Super Bowl if you don't have the talent around the quarterback. You could have a great quarterback like Pat Mahomes, and you still lose Super Bowl because your offensive line has no depth. Because your defense didn't get the job done. Listen, at some point, we got to remember that what we put around those quarterbacks matters. The supporting cast around the quarterback truly, truly matters. Never, ever, ever overlook the supporting cast. That's why I'm saying give Jalen Hurts a chance. You say we don't know what he is. That's right. Let's give him a chance to show us what he is. Let's give him a chance to show us what he can do. That's what I would like to see them do. All right. Thanks for all the comments and people jumping on here. Let's get to the Fanduel Sportsbook pick of the night. All right, so there's a couple games I'm looking at specifically. Let's start with the Bulls and the Rockets. The problem with the Bulls and Rockets game is that Lauri Markkanen is still not back. He's going to be out for a while. He's been ruled out. We don't know for how long. Still no Christian Wood, no Victor Oladipo. DeMarcus Cousins is day-to-day. Usually I would go over in a situation like this, but 226.5 seems high. I'm saying go under on the Rockets and the Bulls, 226.5. I just don't know if these teams are going to hit that number per se. And then what do you do with the same game parlay? Well, here's what you do with the same game parlay on FanDuel Sportsbook. Remember, no Markkanen for the Bulls, no Oladipo for the Rockets. So to me, you know what that says to me? That screams to me Wendell Carter. That's right. Wendell Carter. Rebounds. No Markkanen out there. Give me the over 8.5. And for the points, when it comes to the Rockets, Eric Gordon is back. Give me the over 22.5 for Gordon. That's a 3-way parlay plus 684 odds on FanDuel Sportsbook. I'm Josh Hennig. This is Game Night on 97.3 ESPN. Thanks to Bryan Toporek for joining the show today. Don't forget the NBA podcast. Check that out. I'll be back tomorrow night here on Game Night on 97.3 ESPN.